Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to the Rustic Von Lodge, the magnificent kitchen of the Rustic Von Lodge. It's 6:08. It is exactly 6:08 at the Rustic Von Lodge, and the sun is coming up right through the window. And I'm here for my weekend reading report to talk about all the stuff that I read during the past week. And it is the last day of June, if you can believe it, which means June on the Range is coming to an end. The end of June on the Range. But I do have some Western stuff to show you today because I did get some books in the mail from a friend of mine. He sent me some really cool stuff. So I got a little book haul that I'll show you at the end of this video. And I will talk about the stuff I read during the previous week, this previous week here. And one of those books is a Western because I did close out June on the Range with a pretty good book, I have to say. So let's talk about all the stuff I read. I have my list here for my 500 book challenge, the seemingly never-ending 500 book challenge. It will end one day, one way or another, but it seems to never end. We are at book 153, which is this book, Thor, the Black Galaxy, which I'll talk about in a minute. I'm going to set this aside because I'm going to talk about book 154, Stage to Painted Creek by Vetchel Howard. I forgot to bring my copy of that book up here to the Rustic Von Lodge, so you have to look at this photo of a tattered old copy of this book. And the only copies of this book I've ever seen have been tattered old paperback copies. It's kind of a rare book, I think. I've never seen it other than, as a beat-up paperback. Mine I got for 10 cents on clearance, I think, at half-price books. And it was 10 cents well spent. This was an excellent Western about a marshal who has to get 3 prisoners to the town of Painted Creek on a stagecoach, and the prisoners take over the stagecoach and hold the marshal as a hostage. There are 2 women on the stagecoach, which are also hostages, and these criminals now have to try to escape a posse, which is sent out after them after the stagecoach doesn't show up where it's supposed to. One of the criminals is really innocent because he was forced to kill the guy he had to kill. In a fair fight. It was self-defense. But this guy that he killed, his dad is this super rich guy who owns the whole territory, apparently, with this other super rich guy. And so the marshal actually was childhood friends with this guy. But the marshal is still determined to take him in so he could face justice in a court of law. But this criminal, this guy who's up for murder, who's really innocent, is basically the hero of the book. It's a really good book. It has everything you would want in a Western, I think. Lots of action, lots of really good characters in this book. All the characters are really good. It's actually an excellent book. It's fairly short. But if you ever find a copy of this lying around, I think I saw a copy on eBay and it's like $25, $26 or something. So you can get it, but you might have to pay more than 10 cents, which is what I paid for it. But I think it's kind of rare. Let me know if there are other copies of this book lying around other than paperback copies that are overpriced on eBay. But excellent book. Great way to close out June on the Range. So I read that, Stage to Painted Creek. And right now, I'm reading a book, which is book 156, which is one of the weirdest books, if not the weirdest book, that I've ever read in my life. And that is this, which is A Voyage to Arcturus. This is A Voyage to Arcturus by David Lindsay. David Lindsay is this weird dude. So this dude has had an incredible imagination, because if nothing else, this book, A Voyage to Arcturus, is a triumph of the imagination. It is just so out there. I am that far. So I should finish this probably today or tomorrow. A Voyage to Arcturus. I'm reading this for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club because you can get A Voyage to Arcturus for free on Project Gutenberg. So you can get a free copy of this, and I recommend it highly. This book is insane. It's just crazy. I don't even know how to describe this book. So we have a guy who goes to another planet that, you know, orbits Arcturus. And this planet is just very strange, full of very bizarre inhabitants. And I mean, he goes with two other guys who help him go to Arcturus on this crystal spaceship that's at the top of this tower, and they go to Arcturus. But when he gets there, he falls asleep. He falls unconscious on the voyage there, and he wakes up on this mysterious planet, and he's been transformed to look kind of like one of the inhabitants of this planet. He's still himself, but he's got a big tentacle that's growing out of his chest and some other weird organs that have just grown around his neck and head. And he ends up with 3 eyes. And this tentacle in his chest eventually becomes a third arm, you know? And this book is weird, man. This is a weird book. The plot is, it doesn't have much of a plot, really. It's basically one damn thing after another where he just travels across this planet and meets different inhabitants of the planet and sometimes kills them. And I mean, it's just bizarre. It's kind of a bizarre odyssey. And I'll be interested to see how it turns out. Excuse the geese. There are geese outside. Anyway, it's very strange. And it's been very influential, this book, in fantasy, because it has some of the trappings of science fiction, you know. But it's really a fantasy. And it is an influential book. It influenced C.S. Lewis. And J.R.R. Tolkien, I guess a couple copies of this were found in his library, which is weird. That's a little like finding out your conservative grandpa took acid, you know. But it's hard to see any of this book in Tolkien's work, but apparently he read it. Not many people did when this came out. I think it sold like 600 copies or something. I mean, what must this book have been like for people back in 1920 when this was published? It must have just been like, it must have been, I mean, as weird as it is now to read, it must have just been super out there back then. Because this reminds me a lot more of books that were written a lot later. This feels like something that would have been written in the 1960s. You know, it's very bizarre. And I will talk more about this book after I finish it. I'm going to have to really wrap my head around this and try to figure out how I'm going to talk about it, because it is just so strange, but fascinating. And it has the quality of a dream, but a realistic dream, even though nothing really makes sense, although some things do. And it's weird, man. It's crazy. You should read this book, A Voyage to Arcturus. I can tell you that. I do recommend it. It's strange. So I will talk more about that after I finish it. But what else did I finish? Okay, so I finished book 153, which is Thor, the Black Galaxy. This is Thor Epic Collection Volume 18, which has all the issues of Thor between 1990 and 1991. And this has issues from the DeFalco and Ron Friend's run on Thor, which was an interesting run on Thor. They took over Thor after Walter Simonson left the book. And they did a really interesting run on Thor. They brought in a character called Eric, what was his name? Eric Mulletson. Eric Mulletson was his name. I will show you a picture of Eric Mullison because he is the main character of this storyline. There's Eric Mullison there. Uh, at this period, this was the early 90s, and Ron Frenz, the artist, was obsessed with bad hair. Everybody has bad hair in this series of comic books, including Eric Mullison. I'm pretty sure that's his name. Anyway, there he is. He gets merged with Thor, and so when he becomes basically the new Dr. Donald Blake. You know, Dr. Donald Blake, when Thor started, he would bang his cane against the ground and he would become Thor. So that's kind of what happens with this guy. He becomes merged with Thor, you know, as, you know, these things happen in comic books. And when he bangs his cane against the ground, he becomes Thor. And they're different people, Thor and Eric, but they kind of share memories and a consciousness. But eventually, Thor is separated from Eric Mullison, and Thor ends up killing Loki. He just kills Loki one day because he decides he's had enough of this Loki. And after Loki attempts to kill one of Eric Mullison's best friends, Thor just says, "I've had it." And he kills Loki. But because of this crime, he is sent by Heimdall, who has taken over for Odin because Odin is sleeping. Odin sometimes has to go into the Odin sleep. Anyway, Thor is transported to the underworld, and he's been banished. So Thor is banished for life from Asgard. Not really. He returns, of course. But he's been banished, Thor has. And so Eric Mullison becomes the new Thunder God in this issue here. And he gets a slightly different costume. And so this version of Thor, this is the new Thor, he has all the powers of Thor, but he's completely incompetent. He has no idea how to be a superhero. And he remains pretty incompetent throughout his entire time as Thor. It's interesting. It's an interesting run of Thor. So I read this, The Black Galaxy, and book 155 on the challenge is the Thor War. I read this whole epic collection this week as well, which has Thor stories from 1991 to 1992. So I've read every single issue of Thor up through 1992, or at this point in 92 when this volume ends. So I'm almost done. I'm almost done reading the first run of Thor, which ends, I think, in 96. I think. So only a little bit more of Thor to go. And this here continues the DeFalco and Ron Frenz era of Thor. And now I'm reading The Final Gauntlet, which is the end of that run. And it was probably the last really good run of Thor, because from what I remember, the book goes downhill after DeFalco and Friends leave the book. But it's been a long time since I've read any of these issues. So maybe I'll have a different opinion. Maybe some of the stuff that comes after this run is great. It doesn't look great from what I've seen. It's not as good. I don't think. But, you know, we'll see. We'll see. Maybe it's better than I think. There's a penciler called Bruce Zick who takes over. And Bruce Zick feels very 90s. But we'll see. We'll see when we get to it. It doesn't look great, but we'll see. I will let you know how it goes. But I'm pretty sure that the DeFalco and Friends run is probably the last really good run on Thor. But I got to read the rest, so I'll let you know how it goes. So that was all the stuff I read, but I did get some stuff in the mail from my good friend Mark, who went to the Zane Grey Museum. There's a Zane Grey Museum. It's in Ohio, right? Let me see. Zanesville. It's in Zanesville. And he went to the museum where he got this cool little pamphlet that he sent me, and he sent me some stuff. He sent me, actually it's Norwich, Ohio, because he sent me a coffee cup, which is really awesome. Look how awesome that is. He knows I drink way, way too much coffee. This is true. So a new coffee cup is always welcome, especially one that's from the National Road and Zane Grey Museum, like this one is. That's awesome. So he sent me that, and he sent me some books. Okay, so this book was purchased at the Zane Grey Museum, and that is The Deer Stalker. Not to be confused with The Deer Stalker, which is a whole other book, but this is The Deer Stalker by Zane Grey, and it's great. Look at this beautiful book. So this is definitely something I'm going to want to read at least by the next June on the Range, and hopefully sooner. It's just a beautiful copy of this book, and it used to belong to Dorothy Fillinger. Dorothy Fillinger used to own this book back in August of 1951. But I own it now. I have your book, Dorothy. But look at that. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Mark, for sending me this. That's so nice. That was so nice of him to do. And he also sent me this other Zane Grey book. So you've probably seen these around the old used bookstores. You know, this series of Zane Grey books. There were a lot of these. But I didn't actually own any copies of this set of Zane Grey books. So this is Fugitive Trail. Fugitive Trail. And it still has the little sheet that came with it. It's in perfect shape. I don't think this has ever been read. But yeah, it comes with the advertising sheet that comes with the book, which is really awesome. So that's my other Zane Grey book that Mark sent me. But that's not all he sent me. He also sent me a couple other books. The O. Henry book he said I just needed. And this is O. Henry, Heart of the West. Heart of the West. It's the authorized edition of Heart of the West. And this is another really nice book as well. Look at that. Heart of the West. Yeah, that's cool. So, yeah, he's right. I did need this book. Mark was right. So he sent me this, and really exciting, and he said I have to read this for the next June on the Range, so I will. He sent me Claire Huffaker's The Cowboy and the Cossack. The Cowboy and the Cossack, which I think is Claire Huffaker's most popular book. I recently read a Claire Huffaker book for June on the Range, and it was great. It could be the best book I read for June on the Range this year. I think it is. And this is the book everybody in the comments mentioned after I read that book. Hey, you've got to read The Cowboy and the Cossack. And now I have a copy, and I definitely will read this next June on the Range. So thank you so much, Mark, for sending this to me. That was awesome. That was very kind of you to do. I really, really appreciate it. So I got some cool books. I read some cool stuff. I will continue to read cool stuff. I have Thor. I think at the rate I'm going and reading Thor, I should be done reading all of the first run of Thor probably in the next 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. But I'm kind of tearing through it now. And so I'll be reading a lot more of that. And of course, I will be finishing the Voyage to Arcturus, and I will have a lot to say about this book, I think. I think I will have a lot to say about this book. It is something else. Okay, guys, I will catch you next time.